Breaking news from Montana and Nevada, and it is good news for voters. Welcome to Democracy Docket.
Last week, we told all of you about new lawsuits filed in Montana and Nevada, and today there are updates, and both of them are victories for voters. Marc, let's start in Montana.
Yeah, so this is really a huge development, both for the voters of Montana, but also in the overall fight for people who want to put abortion on the ballot initiative process in state after state. We have seen in the wake of Dobbs efforts to restore women's reproductive health choices through the ballot initiative, trying to overturn conservative Republican efforts to limit abortion rights. And we just saw a big win in Montana where the courts there rejected the conservative Republican Secretary of State's position that inactive voters were ineligible to sign petitions to get this on the ballot for this November.
And the crux of the Secretary's decision in this case is that she issued this directive that officials should reject these signatures from inactive voters in June, once it was pretty clear that there was likely going to be enough support for both a pro-abortion ballot initiative and a pro-democracy ballot initiative to make it in front of voters this fall. The court said, Secretary, you cannot change the rules during the middle of a game, and these signatures will be counted.
Yeah, and Paige, let's remember, this is not an isolated incident. This is part of an overall pattern that Republican secretaries of state and Republican officials have tried to use throughout this country to keep pro-abortion ballot measures and pro-democracy ballot measures. I'm glad to see it is a pro-democracy ballot measure as well, but to keep pro-abortion ballot measures from being on the ballot. I mean, Paige, it feels like ages ago, but it wasn't that long ago that Democracy Docket was reporting on similar efforts, different tactics, but similar efforts in the state of Ohio, where there they tried to change the threshold. They moved dates of the elections. Remember all the shenanigans they engaged in there in Ohio?
Yeah, that was less than a year ago with Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose. He also at the time was running to be the Republican nominee for Senate in Ohio, really putting forward an anti-democracy front to make himself known within the Republican Party. And we're actually seeing the same actions in Montana as well with the Secretary of State Kristi Jacobson. Marc, if you'll recall, she is appealing a decision from the Montana Supreme Court that struck down voter suppression laws for violating the state constitution to the United States Supreme Court, and Kristi Jacobson is trying to bring back the ISL argument there.
Yeah, so again, we see a merger of contempt for the rule of law, contempt for the courts across states by Republicans. As you point out, in Montana, the Republican legislature there passed a massive sweeping set of voter suppression laws. Those were struck down by the state courts, including by the Montana State Supreme Court. And the Secretary of State there is now asking the U.S. Supreme Court to revisit the fringe, right-wing, dangerous legal theory that goes by the name independent state legislature theory. This was an effort first dreamed up by the Federalist Society folks and then brought to the U.S. Supreme Court a couple of years ago by the state of North Carolina in a case that my firm litigated. My firm also is litigating the case in Montana. And basically what this theory would say is that state courts are not allowed to strike down state election laws or state redistricting laws passed by the legislatures, because those state legislatures reign supreme with respect to laws governing federal elections. That is a fringe theory. It has never been adopted. It's been rejected over and over again. But it continues to be pushed forward, just like, Paige, we have seen the efforts to restrict these ballot initiatives push forward in state after state. We talked about Ohio, but we saw challenges to the pro-choice ballot initiative in Florida that failed. We saw efforts in Nevada that have failed. We have seen efforts by Republicans to try to limit ballot initiatives in Arizona. And so this is a part of a anti-democracy effort writ large that deals with voting, deals with abortion rights. But it is good to see that in Montana this has failed.
And this isn't quite the end of the road yet for the abortion ballot measure in Montana. These signatures still have to be verified. The initiative has to formally make it to the ballot this November, but a giant blockade that was set up by the Republican Secretary of State has been removed, and we will keep y'all updated on this case.
Yeah, and Paige, there's no better way for people to stay up to date on what is happening in Montana and around the country than subscribing to Democracy Docket's free daily and weekly newsletters. The link is in the show notes and above.
The other big update today comes from Nevada and Washoe County following a lawsuit filed there over the certification of primary recount results.
Yeah, another blockbuster case. Paige, it is. We seem to have these days. We had one a few last week where we had 3 big rulings in one day. Here we have another blockbuster case decision. This one in Nevada, where we had an effort by Republicans to refuse to certify 2 local elections, right? We're not even talking about them refusing to certify, presidential elections or senatorial elections. Here in Washoe County, second biggest county in the state, everyone. This is where Reno is, swing county in statewide elections. You had 3 Republicans blockade trying to prevent the certification of local elections after recounts, and good for the Attorney General and the Secretary of State of Nevada, who said we're not going to stand for this nonsense. They went straight to the state Supreme Court, filed a lawsuit, and now the election deniers have backed down.
Yes, the officials in Washoe County have voted to certify these election results after the Secretary of State and Attorney General filed a lawsuit. Marc, it's very similar to what we've seen in other states like Pennsylvania and Arizona, where local officials who refuse to certify elections, claiming that, that there's fraud, that there's issues that they need to take care of, back down once lawsuits are filed, and a court appears to be on the verge of saying you need to do your job and follow through and certify the election. So this is a big win in Nevada. But Marc, election certification remains a big issue. We saw it a lot in 2020. It's a weak point in our election process.
Yeah, it is. Unfortunately, the certification process is intended to be part of the celebration of democracy, right? I mean, let's just take the situation in Washoe County. They had close elections, they had recounts, and the idea of the certification process is that now that it's all over, we can all celebrate the outcome of the elections. We can certify what the results are, and that the public can have confidence in those results. And what we have seen since 2020 is a systematic effort by Republicans, first Donald Trump after he lost in the presidential election in 2020, but since then we have seen in 2022 efforts to weaponize attacks on that certification by trying to convince, and in some cases succeeding, the local election officials who are responsible for the certification. Usually this was a ministerial act, it was very non-controversial, but they're trying to get these folks to refuse to certify the outcome of the elections. And, in Georgia right now, there is an effort to argue that the election officials have to do their own investigations and they have to look into fraud and they have discretion. We saw after 2020, Donald Trump tried to convince the Wayne County Canvassing Board in Michigan not to certify. And by the way, when I say Donald Trump, I don't mean like his proxies. I mean like literally Donald Trump got on the phone with Ronna McDaniel and the local election officials to try to convince them not to certify. And in 2022, we saw efforts in, my law firm brought litigation against Cochise County, Arizona, to force them to certify, against a county in Pennsylvania because they refused to certify. So we have seen the need for litigation to deal with this, but this is a growing threat because, it is one thing for whether it's my law firm or whether it is, in this case, the Attorney General and the Secretary of State of Nevada to bring litigation in kind of one-off instances. But as we head towards 2024, Paige, and you and I have talked about this, and Democracy Docket has covered it, we face the prospect of this not being one-offs, but rather being a pattern that could, swamp the resources of election officials and state AGs. And so we all need to be on top of this, and particularly, Paige, in light of J.D. Vance, being selected as Donald Trump's vice presidential nominee. I mean, he is a anti-certification election denier extraordinaire.
Yeah, in an interview, J.D. Vance said if he had been the vice president on January 6, 2021, he wouldn't have certified the presidential election results. He would have, returned it to the states, as they like to say. So it is a big issue. And just like in Montana, this Nevada case isn't quite over yet. The Secretary and AG's petition before the state Supreme Court is still pending. Now, the court could make a decision saying that local election officials are obligated to certify results, which, Marc, as you know, would have a big impact on elections this fall.
Yeah, and I'm all for it. I mean, look, I think that you give the election officials the chance to do the right thing, but when they don't, then, you throw the book at them. I think the state of Nevada, should continue this litigation to make clear that this is not an option in November, but also to hold them accountable for what they did here, because they did, in fact, threaten to undermine free and fair elections, even though they've backed away now. And, it's the same, in Cochise County, I mentioned that my firm brought civil litigation. And after that, the state brought criminal charges against the officials in Cochise County. And I don't invoke the criminal process lightly. Obviously, that is a very, very serious step, but we cannot have a system of free and fair elections where if one party loses, they try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power, starting with by refusing to fill out the forms necessary to have the election certified. And that is what we are seeing. We are seeing these attacks in state after state after state, and it is part of a national movement by Republicans and their conservative allies to attack this. So it is a good news story out of Nevada, but I hope the AG continues there. It is a good news story out of Montana in court. And Paige, it just goes to show that, the cynics want people to believe that that voting doesn't matter. They want you to believe that the courts will not protect voters. They want you to believe that ballot initiatives can't protect abortion rights. And none of that is true. If everyone listening to this video and everyone who shares it, stands up and says, we are going to insist on free and fair elections, we're not going to allow the election deniers to win, we are going to insist that we can exercise our rights at the ballot in ballot initiatives, then Paige, we will win come November. Thank you, everyone, for joining in this special breaking news edition of Democracy Docket. Please subscribe to our daily and weekly free newsletters. The links to that and also to becoming a paid member are in the show notes below.